see the recording. Okay. Hi. Welcome to the Poetry Flash virtual reading series. I'm Joyce Jenkins, Poetry Flash editor and director, coming to you from the Poetry Flash office in Berkeley. Today we are pleased to present Maxima Kahn and Indigo Moor. Thanks to Mo's books, in the chat box, there is a bookshop.org link to purchase new books by these excellent poets. Bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings. Do it! To sign up for our event emails, go to poetryflash.org and scroll down to join our mailing list. Remember to visit poetryflash.org for book reviews, interviews, and literary events. Here to introduce our poets is Richard Silberg, Associate Editor of Poetry Flash.
Hi, everybody. We're ready to roll with some fine poetry today. Our first reader will be Maxima Kahn, who is let's call her a poly artist, an artist in a number of media. She's an improvisational violinist, a composer. She's been a dancer. And this book, Fierce Aria, is her first book. So that's always a kind of a wonderful birth, an artistic birth. Now, let me, if I may, Maxima, give a short quote from the end of the second poem. And here we go with life is furious song, or it is emptiness. This wrenching grace, fierce aria is all. So I think that sets up something of what this book is going for. In reading this book, I'm reminded of the song Knock, Knock, Knocking on Heaven's Door, because there are poems separating the ideal and the actual. There are poems about the limits of language, and in a way, then the action rises up out of the limitations, the earthly limitations. But at the same time, earth, here where we live, is beautifully praised, is beautifully worked through many of these poems. Love making in a number of poems is presented as a kind of a heaven here on earth. So you've got a lot of powerful, beckoning lyric poetry. Let's give her a warm welcome, Maxima Kahn.
Thank you, Richard. That was so lovely. I'm going to carry you around with me if I ever get to actually do an in-person book tour. That was so lovely. And thanks to Joyce and you for having me. I'm so honored, thrilled, and delighted to read with my dear friend Indigo. Yeah, it's just such a treat to get to read with him. So I thought I would start with a poem not in the book, actually, because it's, yesterday was the first day of spring. Today is World Poetry Day, and I wanted to start with a spring poem and a poem of hope and renewal, which I hope are the times we're moving into. Spring. The calla lilies stand, each a single wide-mouthed hallelujah. The fruit trees burst into pale blossom. Even the severest pruning sends forth shoots into the sun-showered air. Winter's heavy drapery of clouds and melancholy, where is it now? The birds darting from bough to bough, mouths flooded with rich song, have no memory of hardship, recite no litanies of what was or cannot be. They join the chorus of Earth's resilient celebration, singing psalms of joy and birth. So yeah, and I'll end today with a spring poem too, but in between, I'm going to read from Fierce Aria. This is the book Fierce Aria. It came out from Finishing Line Press last year, and it is my first full-length collection, so it's really a thrill to finally have it out in the world. I am a musician, and the book is just divided in three sort of musical movements, and they have musical indications, tempo indications for the movements, as I call them. The first section is called Andante Cantabile, which means at a walking pace singingly. And I'm going to start with the poem Harbor Song that Richard quoted from, which is where the title of the collection comes from. Listen, I have to trust the wind that blows through me, nearly blows me out, the body's ballad full of suppressed anger and shimmer. Constant song over the harbor like the bell of a lighthouse, off again, on again, like the light cutting fog. Listen, the music glides unriveted to any solid thing, pours down from some heaven or haven, all agate and azure and mist we can't catch. The ocean's drenched hymn, swallowing whatever identities I once clutched, riven now, tide taking the no longer beautiful, turning it to sand or brushed bottle glass, color of bruise. Strange ghost, it transforms as it makes its transit. I'm afraid of its sway and tidal power, its unhinged and unhinging movement. I'm afraid of the melody moving like dark water through my bones, annihilating while restoring me whole. Yet I am washed or I am nothing. Life is furious song or it is emptiness. This wrenching grace, fierce aria is all. Thanks, y'all. So I'm going to read a couple poems that were written, first written. I revise my poems endlessly over many, many years often. But these next couple poems were first written back in 2001 when I spent a month on a fellowship at the Vermont Studio Center, which is an artist colony in way northern Vermont. And I was there in January, dead of winter. And you're there with 50 other artists for a month to do nothing but create. And it was incredibly fertile, interesting time. So this next poem, The Language of Clouds, comes out of that time. I was searching through the library and I came across this encyclopedia of clouds. And I was so struck not only by these exquisite photographs of clouds and the most amazing cloud formations, but also the most exquisite language used to describe clouds, phrases I'd never heard. And it got me thinking about one of my perennial subjects as a writer, which is the limits of language, what it can and cannot say, and how it shapes us. Yeah, so that's sort of where this poem is going. The Language of Clouds. Sky writes large with a brilliant hand, wave and anvil, impending horizon. Clouds stack up like plates, white china waiting to fall, the gods pellucid writing in the advancing squall. While down on earth, we stumble in the fog, our gestures hardly able to articulate such light. Wan palettes thinning over grayed canvas, threadbare desire, tired old wants, our words a muttered air trailing off before the ends, mute icons towards something we don't understand. Captured ice hangs in the atmosphere, striking us dumb. Cirrus streaks across the sky, nimbus laden with rain, cumulus paving cloud streets the angels might write down. We have no vocabulary to compare with these dialects of illumination. Black waves swallow mountains whole, rewrite the known in vast billows on which we read signs. If I could appropriate the language of clouds, tune its cold mastery to my mouth, draw my images in inverted air with noctilucent lines, spread myself across the sky in manic hues, peach blossom, gunmetal, mauve, and turquoise, and always be erasing, like the Tibetan sand masters, building grain by grain elaborate mandalas to be emptied in the river's flow. If I could speak in stacked plumes, mock suns, and errant holes in the sky, if these distortions were my speech, the scud and pileus, who would I be? How does my language write me? So this next one also comes from my time at the Vermont Studio Center. One evening at dinner, I was talking to two painters, and they were talking about the negative space in paintings as being often more vibrant, more interesting, more important than the objects themselves, or the planes of color themselves. And I was so interested in this idea of the negative space being the really charged, interesting space. And I started thinking about thresholds and transitions, right? All these times like we're in now that are very interesting, and the space between certainties and the space between two bodies and the way that becomes such a charged space. Yeah, so that's what gave birth to this poem. It's called Penumbra, and it starts with a dictionary definition of the word penumbra. Penumbra, 1, a space of partial illumination, as in an eclipse, between the perfect shadow on all sides and the full light. 2, a surrounding or adjoining region in which something exists in a lesser degree, fringe. Maybe we have been talking about this a long time. The sky growing gray and still, the windows turning to glazed stairs. Maybe we sat at the wooden table by the window a long time, the river freezing over inch by inch, snow piling on its banks. Maybe the line is just one unit of measurement and not the absolute. As a painter and a poet, we might never know. Maybe the stone bridge is a metaphor of crossing. Maybe it stands for holding hands. Maybe the edges of our vision are a habitable country and the natives are friendlier than we suspect. Maybe we will make small notations in the margins and these will become the whole story or song. Maybe there are spaces that link the things between and are more important than the perfect shadow and the full light. Maybe the round edges of our bodies signify a borderland and not a hard boundary, a place of exploration and entry. Maybe nothing is definitive. Maybe you would hold my hand. So thank you. Lovely to see you out there, even though we can't fully feel each other the way I wish we could, but we'll do our best here, right? So yeah, this next poem, Richard actually kind of referenced it as well. It's called Changing the Scene. And I'll say a little bit about it. So I'm maybe fortunately or unfortunately, I would say both, the child of two philosophers. Both my parents were philosophy professors. And I think the only thing worse is to have two psychologists as parents. So I grew up with my parents constantly asking me to question the nature of reality, the nature of the self. How do we know we're not just dreaming? You know, what is the meaning of life? How, you know, how do we live ethical lives? All of this stuff. My mom would torture me with the moral philosophy questions, and my dad would do the big sort of consciousness, like, how do you know you're not just dreaming? I remember him asking me this when I was very small, and I was quite upset by it. And my answer at the time was, because I'm awake. Right? I mean, you're not really ready for these questions at age 7 or 5, you know, whatever. So anyway, it has made me a very philosophical poet and a very philosophical person. I am constantly digging in to the deeper meaning of life and of everything, life, the universe, and everything, as Douglas Adams says. This poem is about that. It's really about the gap between our ideals and our beliefs and the actual reality and what we actually do. And it's called Changing the Scene. Because there's this gap, inevitable, between what we believe and what we do. Because we set our ideals among the branches, the high branches, while our feet keep tracing these circles on the ground, our feet of clay. And we believe so deeply, but there are circumstances, no? Both beyond and well within our control. And we would like so much to be good. And we would also we also want so very much to be bad. We are obsessed with freedom, with choice. And this is where the unraveling begins, in that sway between reality and the inner singing. The ideals look so pretty, all dressed up in their white bows and their Sunday school clothes, but they are not what they seem. Then life, of course, is nothing like what it seems. We are in a state of perpetual bewilderment, and we are holding the two things, the ideals and the actual, swaying. One is like some incredibly tall and unsteady building you have to crane your neck to see up the side of, so you feel alternately nauseous and exhilarated. And the other is like some ocean, endless and dark, and we are stumbling around on the ocean floor, kicking up sand dollars and bumping into coral and whales, while we think we should be swimming, but in fact, we are those self-same ragged claws. Which is not to say the position we find ourselves in is so bad, though it's different from the view we thought we'd have from the top of that skyscraper, depending on how you position yourself. But my point is, you don't get to position yourself because the positioning happens of its own accord for you, as it were. So what we are doing is more like a continual repositioning in relation to something, we don't know what, that is continually moving the pieces, changing the scene. And the result, well, there is no end result, is some elaboration, not quite intended, with a kind of allure and a kind of disappointment, with something sort of funny and something terribly sad, and something that is a great relief. This elaboration, look at it closely, swaying, blue, isn't it more or less poetry? Thanks for listening, you all. I know from having attended a lot of these readings this year that it's not the easiest thing to pay attention on Zoom to poetry. So thanks for for your attention. So the second section of Fierce Aria, the second movement, as I like to call it, is called Adagio Mesto, which means slow and sad. It's like the typical slow minor movement of many a classical piece of music. And this next poem comes from that section. Only this. I wanted to burn you, but tender. Not even my words can do that now. I have no idea how poetry works, only I know I don't want to make you suffer. It's not in the doing. Like love making, it's something else that happens underneath. I watch the thin red slant of a girl's mouth, her carefully defined eyelashes. In me, there is no art. There aren't going to be any of the beautiful words, strident, luminescent, whatever the fuck. There isn't going to be anything take your breath away, only this terrible emptying. My body still carved with light 2 days after you last made love to me. And then this next poem is called The Grieving and the Dying. The grieving and the dying just go on and on. It's amazing what a life they have, this life of loss. How is it the birds singing and chirping this morning are so unconcerned by this, do not even know loss's name? How could we humans think we are better than the animals, a life of suffering superior to a life of song? You do me a great kindness, you gods, to let me come back with flight and music as my only goals. They are my only real aim now, but I don't reach them with the ease the birds do. And then there's love, the hook where I am caught, and the flesh around my mouth tears, and I bite down harder, unwilling to let go. Okay, I'm going to do one more from this section. It's called The More You Break It, and it starts with a quote from the poet Mark Doty. The quote is, "The more you break it, the nearer it comes to whole." The more you break it, the nearer it comes to whole. And when I read this in his poem, I was so struck by that statement. Like, really? Is that how it works? Is that like all our suffering and all the things that are breaking us down are actually how we come into our wholeness? That was so intriguing to me. So that's what gave birth to this poem, The More You Break It. The more you break it, the nearer it comes to whole, Mark Doty. Is it true? What shatters us day after vanishing day is how we are being annealed into the fullness that we are. Our salt tears, like pieces of glass meant to catch the light, capture it, reflect some truth hidden in us we were blind to in our happiness. When the light was not fractured, when we didn't know we needed the very force, destroyer, ruthless, how it goes in a circle. And we can only approach when every fragment is fragmented, hammered, splintered, strewn, spent, when it lies glittering, white sand on a beach. Not to make a prayer of suffering, but to find solace in the knowing that this destruction, these shards of the mirror, we can only come nearer when we come through the fire, burnished, reflective, so that we see ourselves as we are in this broken mirror, whole. I'm gonna take a little sip of water here. And the last section of the book is called Allegro Grazioso, which means lively and with grace. And it has sort of the most spiritual poems of the collection. I'm just going to read a couple of them. This one's called Where Everything is Music. It starts with a quote from Rumi. We have fallen into the place where everything is music. And that quote means a lot to me because I actually experience all of life as music and all things as singing. So it really resonates for me. Where everything is music. How often the heart shatters as if shattering were its purpose. Shards rain as a loved one leaves, as a new revelation tears me open, as I mourn the self I failed. Who knew wider had no limit? Who knew rawness is the heart's condition? All this pouring light would bring such fullness, I nearly choke on love. I am swimming and drowning at once, head barely above water, then not above. Life nearly wiping me out. Yet here in these waves, I believe I can hear fragments of luminous song. Okay, I'm going to just do one more from the collection so that I can read a couple of newer poems as well. This is the second to last poem in the collection, What the Flowers Know. And I'm sending it out in memory of my parents, both of whom passed in the last few years. What the Flowers Know. Keep climbing, they say, burn in the blur of the day. Don't lose sight of the sleight of hand. That's God up there on stage. We are puppets in this play, but not idle puppets and no cruel play, despite what seems, the seams tearing open. The very fabric of the world rends, certainly this flesh, but no, say the bright wilting petunia heads half eaten by snail. No, they say, you cannot deny the beauty of form, the peace of the world, the unrelenting peace. We stand here and praise the day, the caterpillar that gnaws through the stalk, the cat that pisses in the pot. No, we stand in solid praise, and our word is as good as God. I love flowers, by the way. I'm a flower fanatic, so they have been my teachers for a long time. I think they're incredibly wise beings, remarkable beings. All right. So yeah, I just want to do a couple of newer ones. These are pandemic poems. This first one's called Music I Didn't Choose. In the background, music I didn't choose. One piece of the story on a half overcast morning at the beginning of the end of an age. A flute whistles, drums are struck, a child sings to a God some have not forgotten. All over the globe, people tune instruments, giving their breath away in hope of comfort and connection. My own heart, like a willow, bends almost to breaking, weeping into the ground, shedding its offering of leaves. In every country, poets scratch new verses and wonder if it matters, while a few men scheme to build a dam to flood sacred ground. Music plays that I didn't choose. It is always that way. Harmony and discord, invention, grace, and harm. The trees know this, but keep silent. The clouds have answers they would willingly share if we cared to listen. I don't know if I can stand with this weight of sorrow on my chest. I turn to the music and witness how branches of oak crisscross the blue sky, how clouds pile up on the horizon. The music stops to give way to a subtler music. I have to tip my ears to hear. And I'll end with a kind of prayer poem called Planting Seeds. I wrote it at last year's spring equinox. And this is a time of year for planting real seeds, but also for planting seeds of intention at the equinox, the spring equinox particularly. And so this is my sort of prayer for our world, planting seeds, spring equinox 2020. I am planting seeds today, this first day of spring, as thunder rolls in the sky is gray, blue, and hail falls noisily with a strange exuberance bouncing off the old snow on the deck. I am planting seeds of hope, of love, of prayer for a better world. I am planting seeds that the Amazon rainforest, the lungs of earth, resprout each tree slashed for profit. Seeds that the rivers run clear and fish return and spawn. Seeds that oceans regurgitate our trash and we find enzymes to break it down harmlessly. Seeds for a collective awakening of humankind into the kind and the human parts of that equation. Seeds for social equity, an end to poverty and racism, each child judged for character, not color, not judged, but loved. Seeds for us to ban all single-use plastics overnight, commit globally to reduce air travel by 2/3 and driving by a half for good. We've seen we can. Switch to hydrogen or solar-powered cars. Seeds that all corporations pay their taxes as they should. Just as we plant seeds of turnips, carrots, potatoes, plain hardy vegetables to see us through lean times, I plant these necessary, practical seeds. And just as we plant lettuces of 6 different varieties and globes of red and purple and yellow tomatoes and spicy red pepper, I plant these seeds of beauty and wild hope. Seeds that people are so roused into their hearts and out of fear that they would never close a door on a brother or a sister. I am planting seeds of thousands of bright dahlias, giant sunflowers, red geraniums, purple bells of petunias to fill the inner cities. Seeds that we all slow down, shop less, walk more, gather in groups without electronic devices, turn off our addictive screens and hug. On this first day of spring, I am planting seeds for the beauty and wonder to win over the greed and hunger, for art to be revered and artists supported, for everyone who wants one to have a home, for guns and bombs to be melted into useful implements and fantastic sculptures, for fresh air, clear waters, earth honored, and all life cared for with tenderness, for justice, for those whose hearts are crimped shut to be opened, to weep without cease until the hurt runs out and love flows in, for this great hush to awaken new possibilities and beautiful old possibilities, the ancient stories retold by firelight and new poems woven from flame, a revolution of heart, of wisdom, grace, of art. Seeds that we take to the streets in ragged song and ecstatic dance until we come home at last to the real and true and beautiful and share a bowl of wholesome soup, a crust of earthen bread, and no one goes hungry. And we sleep side by side, curled around each other in the light of the fire. May this be that spring. Thanks so much.
Okay, thank you, Maxima. Cantabile, very beautiful reading. Okay, our next reader, our second reader is Indigo Moor, who has been in the series 2 or 3 times, I think. We're always glad to have him. He's going to be reading from his new book, and maybe whatever else you want to read from, Indigo. The new book is Everybody's Jonesing for Something. Now, this is his 4th book. Some previous books, most notably the last one before this, the penultimate book, In the Room of Thirsts and Hungers, the mirrored tragedies of Paul Robeson and Othello, were dealing with racism, with that wound of racism. This new book is just dealing with life. It's just feeling around for everything that's notable and available to be talked about. Now he's a former laureate of Sacramento. He's an author. He's a script writer, and that strikes me because a lot of the poems in this new book are like small plays. They're like flash plays, if there's such a word. And he's also an integrated circuit layout engineer. So if any of you out there need your integrated circuits laid out, Indigo is your man. Now, what I like so much about his work is there's a hard-edged humor to what he's talking about, and there's smarts. He's going right to the spine of what's happening, so you can feel the situation, the motives, everything that's happening. And in a lot of where it's useful, there's dialect, there's slang, like the title, Everybody's Jonesing for Something, saying that we're all addicted to something, we're all strung out on something, says Indigo. So let's hear him talk to us. Indigo Moor.
Thank you, Richard. And thank you, Maxima. We've planned this reading for a long time, and I'm so glad I finally get a chance to read with her. This has been, most poets, and I'm one of them, we're actually a lot more anal than people think we are. Before we read, we know exactly what we're going to read. Even though it sounds like we're just winging it, we're never winging it. And then there are times when you start to see people showing up for the reading, and you're like, oh my God, now I have to read this poem and I have to read that poem. And that guy's a concert cellist. I need to read that poem about Jimmy Lunsford. But then you realize it's all about you. So to hell with them, you're going to read what you want. And before I came in here, I was out on my patio where I had an accident about a year ago. And it made me wonder, after speaking with a friend, what Christ would have done had Christ been there. Christ is summoned to the house of the broken ladder. Bless this old poet, head fractured, rung like a bell tied to the edge of a deep forest. Bless the rotted wood, the splintered perch, the skull blood, the oil stain, the missing shoe, cradled like love in a stray dog's teeth. Bless the silence. Bless the unwashed window's feeble gleam. A bevy of ghosts traipse across the pane. Bless the patio tables sway backed, weighed down under a hideous load, a single plate, a single ache, a single glass. Bless the single glass, bless the loneliness. Bless the unhinged knee, the bruised flesh, swelling like scarred bread. Now, poet, rise. I unhinge the darkness webbed into your brain like a backwards dream. I rehang your crooked life on its damaged hook, but for my name taken in vain, as you pinwheel through dusk like a broken doll, I leave you all the sadness. Everybody's jonesing for something. I was speaking from so many people in America, people not me necessarily, often people who didn't think the way that I thought at all. And so it carries myriad voices and myriad genres. It's got poetry, it's got prose poetry. It has several prose pieces in it. It's got fiction, it's got a memoir piece, and it does have 3 short plays. I will not be reading the 3 short plays today, but I do want to read something that speaks solely to me. Most of the people in this book are lost. Everybody is jonesing for something, even if it's something that you don't realize you're jonesing for. At 17, trying to figure out who the hell I was working in this steel refinery before I went back to college at North Carolina State. Lost in the world machine. I'm 17 and black, nimble as Jack, jumping I-beams like candles. An air hose hisses like Medusa's head tied to my wrist. This refining machine performs the alchemy to turn rusted steel virginal again, but it's stinging me to death. Gray hot pellets jet from tiny holes like blackstrap horseflies, cutting away oxidation. Like the foreman's gaze, they always find the tender flesh. I'm summer college fodder, working shit jobs before humping a train back to Raleigh. The welder's first sparks of the day always make me flinch. Dust-laden smoke circles the rafters, ropey chains hanging like man-o'-war tendrils, like a trembling curtain of almost lynchings. I'm a harlequin, playing cards with someone else's deck. I know as much about refining steel as I do about studying textbooks. I'm hard-tracked to do both or neither, until pressure geysers out my brains, until I roll snake eyes with my future. Maybe if I threw myself into this machine, I could save my feet this tortured road. Crosstown bus passes dig deep into minimum wage. An old lady shuffles after my bus as it pulls from the curb. I don't reach the cord in time to give her a fighting chance. Or, like my absentee father might say, maybe I just didn't try hard enough. I enjoy writing fiction and any type of prose. It exercises a different part of the brain, and people ask often enough, because I teach classes in multi-genre writing, why do it? I can't say there's a reason other than you get to exercise not necessarily different parts of your brain, but different senses. I want to read a fiction piece, and this is a fiction piece entitled Guardians. Grandpa Daniel was in his late 70s, yet still spry enough to climb the tree in our backyard for figs. He insisted that the only man ever born worth his salt was Martin Luther King Jr. I'd take a bullet for that man, yes I would, he said, raining figs down upon his grandson Michael, who raced around the tree beneath his grandpa's scrawny legs poking out of Bermuda shorts. Michael balanced a large wicker basket on his head, always a foot away from where the figs hit. When they shot the Reverend King, Grandpa Daniel was true to his word. He lay down on his bed, deciding this was the bullet meant for him. Soon, he told his daughter-in-law, Carolyn, the good Reverend will wake up and I will be a hero. But days later, Grandpa Daniel was still alive and the Reverend was still very much dead. No less true to his word than he was before the announcement of the funeral, Grandpa decided that God hadn't switched him and the Reverend because Grandpa hadn't proven how serious he was. So Daniel, who had survived 7 sit-ins, 6 police dog attacks, and 4 hosings downs with water he claimed was colder than Alaskan ice, dug a shallow grave in the backyard. He donned his second best dress suit, his best, he reasoned, he would wear at his funeral, and lay down in the grave. That night, it rained. Carolyn, who had promised her late husband that she would look after his dad, put an umbrella over the head of the ditch. From his bedroom window, Michael could see his grandpa's feet sticking out from under the gray half dome of his promise, his wool pants sticking to his legs. On the day of the funeral, Carolyn turned the volume of the old Zenith up loud enough to shake the windows. Really, she was turning it up loud enough to wake the not dead. After a few minutes, the screen door creaked open and Grandpa shuffled in. His back was caked with mud, but Carolyn didn't complain when he sat down on the couch between her and Michael. When they showed a close-up of King's face, still as dead as Grandpa was not, Daniel took first Michael's hand and then Carolyn's. He was crying. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm sorry, I did everything I could." But he wasn't talking to his grandson or his daughter-in-law. He was looking at the TV. He was apologizing to everyone inside the glass. Since I have changed the order of reading things, I'm looking around. I was talking to, well, I've been doing a lot of interviews since the book came out, and we were talking about the nature of writing in one of the interviews and how Al Young, the wonderful Al Young, once said that when he thinks of writer's block, what he thinks of is that people have run out of things to talk about themselves. Now, I don't know if that's necessarily true, but I think there's an importance in writing persona pieces. And these are pieces that are not written from your point of view. How often are you taking the time to say, okay, this person is the hero of their own story. How do I see it from their point of view? So I'm going to read a love letter. It's from the patriarchy, and it's written to Dr. Christine Ford. Dear Christine, what has happened to our women? I won't drag reason into your delusion, swatting at windmills with a broom. You complain, even as 1,000 cameras section you like a hog. In the 50s, we would have doused your furnace with Valium. My mother could watch hummingbirds for hours, the inside of her skull, Rorschach flashcards. But the pot roast was never late. Honey, I'm fighting for this country, cracking eagle eggs into frying pans to make us great again. Rebranding swastikas, painting the arms red-striped and blue-eyed. Hell, I'll reach my hand up Lady Liberty's copper skirt and goose the flame if I have to. Sluice purple mountains, pan the American dream from streams crimson with Native American tears. And this is how you thank the architects of paradise? Be reasonable. Drag the viper from the cigar box. Patriotism is a horse losing your name in a bet. Open this gift box. Here's a charred chunk of greenwood, some faded California camp pictures. Remember how we tossed peanuts at Japs in cages until laughter carved stitches in our kidneys? Slow your heart. Guzzle this Librium martini. Let's fold the top down, ride through the sunset like roaring Dale. We'll pitch tents in the Alamo. My guitar strung with real Mexican guts. I'm building 2 McDonald's for every crack in the wall. Christ, woman, have you ever felt safer? Take this Prozac lemon drop and voting sheet already filled out for you. Christen my yacht and we'll save money on fireworks. Shoot immigrants from cannons on the 4th. Finish the dishes. We'll have sex on the foreclosure papers that turn Harlem into a street mall. It won't be college fucking, but is it ever? Hush, Chrissy. Maybe you were assaulted, but bet dollars to donuts you enjoyed it. I'm sure you are familiar with the term rumspringa, and we often misuse the term. It's an Amish term, and it's basically refers to a time when the young ones are given a chance to deal with themselves. They can fall in love. They can find out a little more about what the world is than it would be in Amish life. I went through something similar from the other side where I dated a Creole young lady for a time before realizing what she saw in me. Creole rumspringa. I never thanked you for your black heart, for bucking your paper bag friends, for bumping thighs to Sugar Hill. The funk I gave, you took. For the 2x2 or 4x4s. Forgive my blackness staining your high yellow dinner table. Thank you for slipping me the right fork for the salad. When the crow swooped, your daddy drew a lead hole through its heart, then looked at me like a wish he forgot to make. Remember that? Your hallway to 5 bedrooms for 3 people, damn, that's still dizzying. A solid oak room waiting to be filled, a vacuum for unwritten laughter. Sorry, I wore tattered dress Converse to your party. Your mother's unbroken rhythm of tisks and condescension still rankles my ass. Your uncle asked where my father went to school. My teeth ground unspun glass. Incognito. I get that joke now. You called me Invisible Man, and I thought Claude Rains. I never dreamed you'd want to slap the country grin out my mouth, strain out my black and ugly. I do want to read a couple poems from In the Room of Thirsts and Hungers, which is my previous collection, because I do want to talk a little bit. They gave me 30 minutes. I'm not going to read for 30 minutes, but even 20 minutes is more than enough. And since I have the opportunity, I want to talk just a little about how these poems and these books came together. In the Room of Thirsts and Hungers was 9 years of research. And this is how thick 9 years of research comes to. And it's because everything that you study doesn't come into the book. At some point, you find one emotional moment about the person you're talking about. You write about that emotional moment, and then everything about the history comes into it. Jimmy Lunsford was a wonderful, wonderful saxophonist. He was a great band leader, and he had so much more going on in his life than just being a band leader. He was in love with W.B. Du Bois's daughter, but even though she loved him, Du Bois had other plans for what he wanted for his daughter. And he got it. His daughter eventually married County Cullen, which is only a problem if you don't mind your daughter marrying a man who was definitely gay. But the picture that this poem is about is he was on stage. The last picture I saw of him, he was on stage, and the caption was, "He died 48 hours later." How can you not write about that? Freeze frame. In 48 hours, he'll headline a slab in the morgue. But tonight, Jimmy's band is hot. The high's high, the lows scrape dust off the McElroy ballroom floor. On this man, 45 looks 60. Still, he fans his sax and the room blurs silent. It's true. When he heard about the divorce, when Nina Du Bois discovered what all Harlem knew, County Cullen packed more sugar in his heels than a Louisiana cane field, Jimmy laughed his ass off. But that was years ago. Tonight, not good enough for Daddy Du Bois has no place on this stage cause Jimmy's band is hot. He stumbles. Gravity trembles his wingtips, spotlight to spotlight, ankles swollen, stuffed deep in fine thread socks. He's no bird, never been. A couple notes spew flat, wander the crowd, begging for change. It's clear he's gut shot. His sheet music pinned on silk, lining a pine box. Clamped to his leg is a coronary, howling, "You can die here or seaside, Jimmy, here or seaside." He'll flash cool in a tux, even dead. A cemetery may not be the Cotton Club, but hey, a gig's a gig, and hot is hot. And let me tell you, Jimmy's band, how we got here from there, and everybody's jonesing for something. It's almost like the titular poem. To me, everyone is struggling for something. Everyone is jonesing for something. And even if you never reach it, there's a point where you plateau in your search. And it's always important to take a moment and say how you got here. I cross-swam a river, snake bit, coolness pounded into my temple. A requiem of angels took pity, dipped one wing, dusted off my knees, blessed my skin. Barefoot, I haunted back roads, shouldering your memory, sober-eyed and mysterious. Howled a pregnant moon down from a willow tree, cracked bone lust and sucked marrow. Hexed my guilted shadow, somersaulted naked through poppy fields, licked dew off the back of headstones. For 6 months, I dodged poison darts, took a sledge to the chest, collapsed, caught your scent on a breeze, rose like Christ, a punch-drunk flag bearer, ears genuine and swollen. Enabled by your name, I stumbled over fireflies, sharpened my canines, yanked myself forward, brushed off my heart, put it back in my chest. Set my head skyward, looking for a sign, your face in the clouds. I did make a promise to someone, again, right before the reading. You get an idea of what you're gonna read and then it just changes. Memoir and fiction, or at least for prose, they do have a similar feel to them, but when you're writing memoir, you have the ability to be just a little more introspective. And I do have a memoir piece regarding my decision, or we'll call it my decision to not be a part of the church anymore. And I'm doing a good job of talking to you as I pretend I know exactly where this piece is in the book. It's a new book, so I don't. But if I keep talking long enough and sounding intelligent as I speak, you won't even notice that I'm flipping through the damn book to find out where this piece is. Okay, I'm going to the contents. Let's take a moment, speak amongst yourselves. This is what happens when you choose to read a piece that you hadn't intended to read. Okay, this is getting ridiculous even for me. When I stumble across it and as I flip through the book to get to the poems I did intend to read, then I'll come back to it. Oh, it's right here. Extinction event. We can edit that part out later, right? Yes, extinction event. My grandmother would kneel before me, stick one finger inside the starched collar of my dress shirt and pull me to her. With a firm grip on the knot of my clip-on tie, her knuckle on my Adam's apple, she slathered Vaseline on my face, careful to smooth out all the rough spots. I always pulled back, forcing her to say, "Hold still, boy," as if I didn't know what I was supposed to be doing. It's hard to say why I struggled. Maybe because I was 7. Maybe because the shirt was for a 6-year-old version of me. And even without her finger inside, the collar felt like 200 years of Black Southern Jesus trying to strangle me. Mostly, I think I resisted because of my reaction to the library that opened near our house. The first book I checked out was a giant book called Dinosaurs A to Z. 20 pages filled with full color illustrations. Apparently, the most important part about dinosaurs is that they died, because that is how the book began. The author speculated that a few million years ago, something came out of the sky, crashed into the earth, and killed them off. Like most tough quasi-country boys, I secretly slept with both feet under the covers, afraid of what might wake at night and reach for me. Now, I was also afraid of what might come from the sky when I closed my eyes. Apparently, the destruction of dinosaurs did not happen quickly, at least not to the dinosaurs far from ground zero. Like me, they had time to pull away thinking, no, I don't understand this. No, this feels wrong. And if it must happen, can somebody tell me why? But meteors don't explain themselves any more than grandparents. Meteors hit the planet, dinosaurs die. They spend millions of years digesting inside the bowels of the planet. Then they get sucked up, mixed with a bunch of other stuff, and smeared across the faces of little Black boys. With that much misery spread on my face each week to meet Jesus, is it any wonder I drifted from the church? Okay, that's not fair. There are at least a dozen reasons I wasn't suited for Christianity. And while dinosaurs on my face wasn't reason number 1, it certainly wasn't close to number 12. I was a sensitive boy who had no words to express myself. Mostly, when faced with uncertainty, I set my teeth, closed my mouth, and squirmed. I don't know how many dinosaurs came to church on my face over the years, but there had to have been hundreds. I imagine Triceratops because they were my favorites. Brontosauruses because just one of them could flatten the church with the swing of its tail. And of course, Tyrannosaurus rexus because, hey, why not the entire congregation running screaming while I snuck off to the store with my tithe money? But after all the imagined carnage ran through my head, all that was left were dinosaur hostages like me, all trapped on a church pew, all of them scared, lonely, and bewildered, mouthing along to words that almost made sense, rituals that almost came together in their heads. Why did I answer the preacher's call to come to Jesus and be baptized? I did it because I hoped it would make my grandmother happy. My family was sown into the church. My grandfather's name engraved on the plaque hammered at eye level into the bricks by the entrance. As for me, what can I say? I wasn't feeling Jesus. I read the Bible because the stories were pretty cool. Looking back, I can see how that gave people the wrong impression. My family hoped I would grow up to be a preacher. I imagined I would grow up to rewrite the stories, maybe get one of the books named after me. Let's face it, some of them go on forever, and you can see the endings coming a mile away. Children are hyper aware of not fitting in, of being a disappointment. But if the stories were to be believed, I could remove my sin with a quick dip in a pool. When you're an over-imaginative boy, very few ideas survive the first implementation. I admit the pomp and circumstance of the moment got to me. By the time Reverend Wallace was ready to duck me into the water, I was so wound up and nervous, there was no way the altercation would not end in a fight. When he grabbed me by the back of the neck and my shoulders to lower me into the concrete pool beneath the pulpit, I fought back. But he was bigger and more practiced. In the end, he subdued me and held me under. Water shot up my nose. I coughed. Somebody hazy through the shimmering yelled, "Praise Jesus." My baptism only delayed the inevitable. The day I told my grandmother I didn't want to go to church anymore, all she said was, "Okay." She didn't argue. She didn't try to convince me. Everyone else got dressed and left for the service. I stayed in my pajamas and watched cartoons. Things were never the same between my grandparents and me. Every Sunday, the gulf widened. Once, fed up with my obstinance, my grandfather said, "That boy needs to be baptized." My grandmother sniffed behind the mesh veil of one of her more sparkly church hats. "He got baptized last year." They were speaking loudly. They wanted me to hear. My grandfather laughed. Maybe he should go back and try again. After they left, I turned off the TV and went back to bed. Dinosaurs, A to Z, was adamant in its conclusion. Some dinosaurs must have survived the historic meteor strike. They woke up the next day to fires, debris, and ash. They picked themselves up and went on living their lives, knowing they couldn't undo what happened, and even if they could, they wouldn't know where to start. All right, I'm not quite outspoken, everyone. I'm going to read two more poems, and then I will be done. The next one is as much of a myth as anything else. I have a good friend who's writing a book based on fairy tales and myths. And this was one I invented. This is V8, not a Bloody Mary, just in case anybody was wondering. Pretty Boy Sanchez. Legend has it, Sanchez's right cross whistled like a train through a tunnel. He had a hotline to Satan, dropping hellfire into his hook. His left thigh, carved from petrified oak, the right Gibraltar. His mother chewed gunpowder instead of sorghum. His father gifted his son those quick twitch ballet feet before each fight. When he went down in the fifth to a Jersey pipe fitter paler than blindfish, Mexican fans stormed the ring. They couldn't touch the gringo, so they lynched Pretty Boy. Some called it a mistake. Some said there was a kind of blindfold in their bloodlust. Years later, Asabia schooled them that leeching his veins was the only way to get back the song he borrowed from his people. I want to thank you all for coming. Thank you, Richard and Joyce, for having me here. Thank you, Maxima, for a wonderful reading. I want to end with Joshua in the New World. In that one movie, a fallen angel squatted like a vulture in a branch. I read a book where a demon's nose sprouted from its bark and screamed gibberish. Joshua, the tree, pushed his hands to heaven for water, stapled to the sky like moths on a screen. A new Bible calls for fresh followers, years and miles from that old profited land. Wikipedia says the Utah War had no memorable battles. Mormons didn't give it to the tree its name. Joshua is a bastardization of Jehoshua. Yucca trees brand themselves arid plains, bleeding moisture from the dust. Their hands claw eyes for prayers from another continent and desert. It's untrue. Moses never reached Nevada. His staff never parted the sands. Joshua collapsed under fluorescent lights in a Reno bathroom. Two bouncers muscled him out a service door, hustled past a passed out Elvis and a homeless Jesus. Both of them, one lucky seventh throw from New Canaan. Thank you very much, everyone. This has been wonderful.
Okay, that was a reading for the people jonesing for poetry. Let me repeat the thanks to these two fine readers, Maxima, Kahn, Indigo, Moor. Thank you both so much. Here comes Joyce to sign us off.
Thank you all for joining us. Really, thank you for this magnificent reading. And please check the chat box for the link to bookshop.org. The link is bookshop.org/lists, LISTS/poetry-flash-readings to see these two wonderful new books by these poets. And check out poetryflash.org for more Poetry Flash readings in the future. Thank you so much.